It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Hello, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Some fun things going on in my life. Right before I went to Europe, met with the doctor, and blood work says that I am pre-diabetic, and a ultrasound, I guess, shows that I have a fatty liver. So I have to be a better boy now. So I've been trying to work out, and of course, even on the trip, I did eat quite a bit, but lost a couple of pounds because I was walking 5 to 10 miles every day. So I am going to make a greater effort to walk and exercise. And matter of fact, this morning, I did 45-minute workout with my Bowflex and riding my Schwinn Aerodyne exercise bicycle. So today's workout, I'm supposed to do an hour a day. That's my personal goal. The doctor said, do a half an hour every other day. And I said, I already do almost an hour a day. Should I reduce my exercise by 75%? And the doctor said, no, that would be a bad idea. And so it turns out my problem is more of food. And one of the things I had been doing to lose weight was trying to eat low carb. And because I don't like vegetables, I tended to substitute it with foods like cashews, which have a lot of fat, apparently. I've looked at the label. And Atkins bars, which have a good amount of fat. So now I'm reading labels. I was in the store and I found out that, what are they? Vegetable chips. So instead of potato chips, they're vegetable chips. They have more fat per ounce than Oreos. Is that trippy or what? So just because it says vegetable doesn't mean it's necessarily good, because I'm assuming that they are fried in oil, so they absorb some of the oil. Pretzels, on the other hand, have almost no fat, and they're not even that high in calories. So I'm going to switch from chips and crackers and all those things to more pretzels, and of course try to eat fewer of them. I also found out that my low-carb ice cream, which had no carbs, has a lot of fat. So I actually can reduce fat by eating regular ice cream. It's about the same calories. It just has sugar instead of fat. So it's not worse, but it's better for the fat aspect. So if you have any clever recipes, ideas on how to eat healthy, don't get too wacky on me. Don't send me detox stuff. I'm just going to be sad that you listen to my show. But, you know, a nice diet or menu items. As an example, my wife made this thing with zucchini that she baked and then seared in a pan to give it a bit of a crunch, and then layers of spinach and a handful of other vegetables, and then topped off with some spinach, and then covered with crumbled turkey, ultra lean turkey meat that had been, again, pan cooked, and then sprinkled it with some aged cheddar cheese, so it's nice and low fat. And oh my God, was that delicious. So I can eat almost all these vegetables. I just have to figure out how to do it. So suggestions are welcome. I know it's not going to be easy. I have to be more physically active and reduce fat and reduce sugar and total carbs, because I need to lose a little belly fat. So we've got that fun going on. Other things in the news in relationship to investments, we've talked about the fiduciary rule, which is now dead. So you can ignore that. The companies can go back to screwing you just like they have before, and I see it all the time. I keep thinking I'll run out of ways to find where companies are differently creative and taking your money. But no, people keep bringing me new stuff. Got this email here that said, and I'm just going to read you some text of it. We're busy with working with blockchain and AI companies whose products and services are market ready for our vast U.S. consumer market. We're preparing to bring these companies to the U.S. market with a great licensing plan that will allow our SEC qualified offerings to gain capital in order to tap into the vast U.S. consumer market now. We're happy to discuss the esteemed members of the sellers classes in order to provide greater detail on this product expansion. What the fuck is that? That's just a bunch of words strung together. I have no idea what that means. So other than someone is trying to swindle me and or my clients into investing money in blockchain. So buzzword blockchain, yay. So we've got that going on. That's nice fun. Oh, the reason I mentioned the fiduciary thing is there is a new due diligence rule. And I have mentioned it before, but I want to cover it briefly here. Anyone who is a client of mine and happens to listen to the show, the big change for me and a lot of advisors is it can become very difficult for us to move money from one of your accounts to an unlike titled alternate account. What I mean by titled, for example, you could have Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You could have Mr. Smith's IRA and Mrs. Smith's IRA. Mrs. Smith's IRA, the title is Mrs. Smith. On the joint account, the title is Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So they are different titles. The ownership is different. In the past, someone could call me up and say, hey, Phil, can you move $5,500 or $6,500 if you're age 50 or older from my joint account as cash to my IRA or Roth IRA as cash? And I say, of course I can do that. Send it to me as an email so I have a written record that you've requested this. And then I will call up TD Ameritrade, who is my qualified custodian that I used, and they'll check me in as an advisor and password and security code, and then I can just give them a verbal to move the money from one account to the other. Takes a few minutes, not too awful. Bam, I can do that. And most people utilize that in the days and weeks and maybe a month or two before the end of tax season. I will no longer be able to do that. Period. There is a couple of workarounds. One, you can send the money yourself. It's easiest to hook up your bank to TD Ameritrade or whatever other accounts that you may have and just move the money on your own. If someone is a client with me, there is a form that you can fill out that gives explicit permission to move money from one account to the other. And the concern here is a couple of fold. One, if money is moving from a joint account to an individual account, there is concern that the other joint account owner may not be aware that the money is being moved and they're losing control of their assets. So it's not a crazily stupid bad idea. It's just a change. So something to keep in mind. The other thing I want to talk about for investing skeptically is called Good to Great. And then, of course, after that, we have a fascinating interview with Hypatia. And this is the fourth, I think, and last segment from the book Women versus Religion. And it's something I personally wanted to highlight, and I'm delighted to do it. And I'm continually surprised not only that adults believe the Bible and Christianity, but particularly that women do. Because read the book. I mean, it's kind of freaky what's in there, and what results from it is not favorable to women. So just listen to that interview, and we'll get to that a little bit. But before that, of course, we're going to do a little segment called Good to Great. I recently had a young adult ask me, what books should I read to learn about business? And I prepared a handful of books, some ideas that I had. I don't have a canned list that I can share, but maybe I should make one. But my focus is generally more on investing. And there's three books that I recommend, and I talk about them all the time. Richest Man in Babylon, Random Walk Down Wall Street, and then finally the third, and I recommend them in order, Common Sense on Mutual Funds. That's the only one I do insist that you get in paper, physical form, because you're going to want to make notes and highlight and write notes in the book or on a piece of paper. Treat it as a textbook. But I gave some of these books, and then one of the things that I said was probably read one business book every other month And then in between that, read something else. I don't care if it's Harry Potter. I don't care if it's the greatest works of art in the world. I don't care if it's science fiction. You have to be a well-rounded person. And my personal goal, and I'm falling a little short, but my personal goal is to read 2 books a month. Now, often they're read to me because I love Audible, but sometimes I have to read the books, and I have an interview with somebody coming up in a week or two. We'll talk about that then. But reading books is important. Exposing yourself to new ideas is important. Don't sit and watch one cable TV channel all the time. Personally, I like MSNBC, but no more than an hour a day. And often I skip it, and sometimes it's half an hour. I get it. Trump's fucking everything up. That's what MSNBC says. I agree with that, but I don't need to hear it for 6 to 8 hours. It'll just piss you off, and you're not learning anything new. You're not enriching yourself. And one of the books I recommended is called Good to Great, and I'm going to focus on that. But what I told this young adult was that read all these books and then ignore 80% or more of what's in them. And they're like, well, then why would I read them? Because you need to know the other things people are thinking. But they often have vague ideas, advice that becomes popular and trendy and then goes away. And sometimes they have really good ideas, but they're kind of vague and nebulous. Like good companies are more likely to have a CEO that respects their employees. Well, no fucking shit. Okay, so you probably could have known that yourself, but it's nice to know what other coworkers, especially if you're brand new to the working world, what people who are 30, 40, 50, and 60 might have read 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So get some classics in there and mix it up. And I was thinking, I've been meaning to do forever a segment on Good to Great. And so I finally had to crack down and find some time to do this. And I'm going to pull from at least 3 different sources here. I think I may have some information from Wikipedia too, so I'll give them a shout out. But one of the articles is on the website called Market Watch. And again, it's about the book Good to Great. Their piece is titled, Surprise, Those Great Companies Generally Turn Out to Be Meh or Duds. So we have that. I also have a very old piece from Freakonomics, which was written in '08, which reviews the companies before 2008, because the Market Watch story is from 17. And then I also have an article from medium.com called Greater Than Good to Great. It's a review of the newer book by the same author, Jim Collins, Great by Choice. And this is from also 2017. It's a very short thing, but it has some numbers. And so I'm going to go over some of these numbers and talk about how some of these stocks have done. And one of the problems one always finds with this is actually getting long-term, and the Good to Great came out in 2001, so we're talking about up to 17 years. Getting long-term performance on stocks can be surprisingly more difficult than you would expect. We've talked about this before, but you can have complications, and it can be very difficult to figure out how much a stock really did make over that time. Now, some companies, you can buy the stock, and if they pay no dividend, it's really easy. You buy the stock at one point at one price, you sell it at another point at another price, and you can calculate how much you made per year on average, yada, yada, yada. When they start paying dividends, and the dividends change, and the dividends come out at different times of the year, it gets considerably more difficult because you have to include the dividends and not just the change in the price. And then some companies buy and sell, restructure, reorganize, file bankruptcy, issue new share classes, and it gets really, really notoriously complicated. So these 3 stories, and one of the reasons I went to 3 of them is they have some different numbers, and I'm going to go over some of them. The first one, and probably for most of my commentary, is going to come from the Market Watch article, because it not only talked about the book Good to Great, it also talked about In Search of Excellence from 1982 and Built to Last from 1994. And it basically came up with the opinion that these stocks that are listed in these books as a whole slightly beat the market. I don't know how they calculated it because I don't have the means to do it. I could probably get some very expensive database and go through it, but then I don't have the time to do it. So I'm just going to take their word that their calculations. And let's see, do they have the time frame here? All right, so what they did was they took 20 years of performance for the two older books and only 15 years for the newer book. And the older books were published more than 20 years ago, in Search of Excellence, and all the way back to 1982. So to pick 20 years of performance, I'm assuming the most recent 20 years? I don't know. So at some point, they're mixing and matching different lengths of data. So that's a little dubious. And as we've talked before, depending on the exact start date and end date, you can get pretty different results. But their result of all three of these books, these companies beat the market by a little bit. Fine. It's not amazing because these were the great companies. I mean, these were the 15 or 20 best of the best of the best companies. And the statistically insignificant improvement over the market by this one article is not all that impressive. The story from Freakonomics, which was put in 2008, said that the companies on a whole have underperformed the market, although they don't give very specific numbers. And then the article from Medium gives some very specific numbers from the release date of Good to Great, October 16, 2001, until a date specific, June 26th of 2017, which was a little bit the day before this article came out. So when I go to specific percentage returns, I'm probably going to pick from there a little bit. So before I get into those details, I want to talk about specifically the book Good to Great, because I remember reading it when it was brand new because everyone had to. It concerns me because what they did was they took every company in the United States and then started looking at who did well. Now, the question is, how does one define well or good? And they created their own criteria. And if you want to know their criteria, you can get the book or read other reviews. But let's say it's earnings, it's stock appreciation, it is employee satisfaction, whatever criteria they pick, they start filtering out from 6,000 or 7,000 companies down to a couple thousand, down to a couple hundred. And they keep applying more criteria until they get to a manageable set of 15 or 20. And I guess in this case, it was about 11 companies. So these are the companies that are now great by this rationalization that you use to whittle down to a manageable set. So it wasn't a predefined set per se and then applied to everything. They kind of went through and kept cutting and cutting and cutting until they got to a reasonable amount. Then they looked at all of these great companies, these 11 companies, and said, what do they have in common? What can we learn from these incredibly great companies to utilize for other business people that can then use those ideas, with the assumption that if you do things the same way as the great companies, then you will also be a success. I'm concerned with the whole methodology, first of all. So I am not aware at any time that they took a random set of 11 of the not great companies or 11 of the medium performance or the 11 of the shitty companies and said, were they employing the same ideas and the same strategies? For example, and I threw out the idea of, having a CEO that is good to the employees. Are there medium performance and shitty companies that also have CEOs at the same ratio that are good to their employees and the employees like working there, but they just don't make money? Because sometimes it can be a great company, but you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time and you get whacked. Sometimes you can be a mediocre company and be in the right place at the right time and make tons of money. So it's hard to know. So they didn't provide a neutral comparison. They didn't provide a placebo, I guess, or double blind us in any way. They knew what they were looking at. They knew what they picked as the criterias. So let me go over the list of the companies in the 2001 book called Good to Great. Number one is Abbott. And this, I'm going to pull these numbers from the Medium site, and it's Medium greater than Good to Great. Abbott Laboratories performed had a market increase of 89.52 according to this website. And that seems like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, 89%. The Dow increased 29.34%. During the similar time frame, the S&P 500, including dividends, was up about 144%. So big companies, as measured by the S&P 500, did better than the Dow, which is only 30 stocks. So we're talking about 129 or 144. I don't have access to easily compare to the total stock market. It's probably around that same amount. I would guess that it's slightly bigger because small stocks tend to do teeny bit better over the long run. But we're going to ignore that. We're going to use the S&P 500, 144% since 2001 to about the middle of 16, because I don't have the information by day, but it gives us a relative ballpark. So again, we're looking at 144 as the benchmark, the S&P 500. Abbott Labs made 89%, significantly underperforming the benchmark, but Abbott Labs is still around, and he made a good chunk of money. Number 2 on our list is Circuit City. That's right, Circuit City. Do you remember Circuit City? It was kind of like the Best Buy, but even shittier. Yes, Circuit City, who came up with DivX DVDs, where you could buy a DVD that you can't use until you connect your DivX player to a phone line and call up, and then you can watch it for 48 hours, and then it becomes unusable again. Yes, Circuit City went bankrupt. So the return on that stock was zero? No, not even zero, minus 100%. So that's not cool. The next in order, I'm doing these alphabetically, so I'm not picking and choosing what did well versus bad. The next stock, Fannie Mae. Now, the funny thing is that Fannie Mae is a quasi-governmental agency, or it's a business supported by the government and is involved with home loans. Well, the reviews that were done earlier, especially Freakonomics in 2008, the whole housing crisis hadn't happened yet, and this stock was meh. Well, as of 2017, if you had bought Fannie Mae in 01, Medium, the website Medium, says that you would have lost 96.45% of your money. Not too good. The next one is Gillette, and Gillette was bought by Procter & Gamble. So when a company like Gillette is bought in its entirety by Procter & Gamble, we talked about earlier, how do you calculate its price increase, its value increase? I don't know. So Medium didn't even bother to put a price on it because you can't. I'm going to guess that the way it was going up about 5% a year, and then what Gillette did, that this is up about 22-30% since the time, but that's not a really solid number, so it's dicey to figure out how much Gillette would be worth today. Kimberly-Clark, who makes papers, tissues, Kleenexes, and various consumer products, up 122%, still below the 144%. Next, we have Kroger, grocery stores, up 79%. Now we get to a company called Nucor. Nucor, apparently, because I had to do a little research because I was just stunned by this, it is up 485%. So it definitely beat the market of 144%. It is a company that does small batch smelting or fabrication of steel. So as steel mills around the United States closed, if you wanted a small batch of something made in the United States, or you wanted something that had a certain type of quality to it, and you didn't want to wait, this was one of the companies that was remaining, that you could buy certain types of steels or alloys fabricated in the United States, made the way you want them, delivered in a short period of time. All of its competition failed, and the stock did absolutely amazing. So huge win there. The next one is Philip Morris. And Philip Morris is another one of these companies that it's incredibly complicated because the stock was up, but then it became part of Altria in 2003. And then in 2008, Altria sold off Philip Morris International. So there's Philip Morris and there's Philip Morris International, and then there's Altria. I don't know how you guess to make what Philip Morris itself as a part of all that combinations would be worth. But Medium, the website, says 144%. Okay, they match the market. I'm just going to go with that number because I have no way better to figure it out. Next one is Pitney Bowes. They're up 59%. Walgreens has a stock increase over the time frame of 18%. And again, it's 18% versus 144. And then we have another one that, as of the time of this article, again, back in 17, and I don't know how the company's done since then, is Wells Fargo, which says that it's been up 159%, beating the 144% benchmark. So we have one that matched the benchmark. We have one that beat it by a few percentage points. I don't know if that's statistically significant. And then we have Nucor, which crushed. So we have one match, one slight beat, one crushed out of 11. The other 8 underperformed a little bit, underperformed significantly, or like Walgreens, terrible performance of 18%. Gillette, we don't know. Fannie Mae lost 96%, and Circuit City lost 100%. So on the average, they sucked. It's just absolutely terrible. And these were supposed to be the great ones. And it's just an example of how you can post hoc rationalize a small set of companies that you selected and say that they're great, but going forward, they weren't great. Another thing that this also shows is that only one company out of 11, only one out of the great companies produced eye-popping returns that beat the market. And it's very, very common to get results like this. And I've talked about it before, something about 4% of all companies produce half of all the stock market returns in the long run. Now, what are those 4%? You can look at them today for who produced this result in the last 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. Odds are they're not going to be the same ones going forward, which is why I'm concerned if people have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% or more of their stock investments in a handful of stocks. And another reason to not do such a thing. So good to great, dramatically underperformed according to Medium, according to Market Watch. They slightly overperformed, but not statistically significant, about 1.5%. And the other, Built to Last and In Search of Excellence, outperformed by even smaller amounts. So I'm calling it nothing statistically significant, and you are less diversified. And I think odds are you're not going to beat the market, because that's just what history shows us. So that's a little bit on good to great.
You mind spending 30 seconds on dark matter just for the heck of it? So when we observe galaxies, we find that they're spinning around at such a rate that stars on the edge should be flung outwards, sort of like water droplets on a bicycle wheel that's spinning fast, the water gets flung out. Yeah. But the stars aren't getting flung out. Something must be holding them in. We don't see anything that can do that, but we know gravity has the power to hold things together. So we imagine that maybe there's some matter out there that we don't see, dark matter. That's why we don't see it. It doesn't give off light. And that matter is exerting a gravitational pull, holding those stars together in these spinning galaxies. And when we make that hypothesis, it explains observation so spectacularly well that we begin to gain confidence that maybe the stuff that we haven't yet seen and we haven't yet touched or smelled yet, maybe it's real. So we build big detectors and we try to capture one of these dark matter particles. We haven't succeeded yet, but I think that we will. So this is a beautiful example of how observations drive rational thinking to explain the facts and ultimately verify it through observation and experiment that can be replicated. That is what science is.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, you are still listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Today, we have another segment in our review, I guess, or our interviews from the book Women versus Religion. And today, I have Hypatia Alexandria. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for asking me to be part of this review of the book. I think
I'm not sure
Karen had a great idea.
She sure did. And your segment, your chapter, I guess, is why Hispanic women should abandon religion. I like that. Tell me more about it. But actually, I think I want to cover the very first thing you covered in your chapter. was a discussion of the terms Latino and Hispanic. Can you walk me through your philosophy on that?
Okay, I'm going to give you the perspective from a Latino/Hispanic person. To me, is completely interchangeable. Generally, on the West Coast, I have observed is more Latino is more used, and on the East Coast, Hispanic is more used. There is a lot of people that claim to be academics, and they claim to include, exclude, some subtract, divide, multiply, and they give convoluted explanations. And then, well, but if we take the Caribbean and we add Brazil, and we take Brazil and we add the Caribbean, to me, it's not that complicated. Generally speaking, on the East Coast, Hispanic is more used, more widely used, and Latino is more widely used on the West Coast. But I think most Latinos do not mind either term used at any time. They don't have a bad connotation, or one is preferable over the other. There's nothing like that. It's just, we just happen to have two different terms for the same thing,
Sure.
Which is very common in Spanish. We have tons of, the same word with different meanings, or words that sound the same, different but mean the same. It's just a language thing, I think.
I understand. And of course, if you consider yourself Latino or Hispanic, you get to define the terms. It's not me. So we will continue on with that definition, or at least recognizing that the words mean the same. Who is included in that group of Hispanic and Latino people?
Well, I will tell you who is excluded, because I think it's easier.
Okay.
Brazil is excluded, and Spain is excluded. And pretty much everyone else is included, with the exception that not all the Caribbean countries are included. Of course, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic are included. But, if you go to, any other of the small islands where Spanish is not widely spoken, even though it is spoken in many islands, they are not so much called Hispanics, but they'd rather be called Caribbean. But specifically, Spain and Brazil are excluded.
Okay, so by included, you mean most people that speak Spanish except for Spain?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Spanish people are European. They are
Sure.
not Hispanic, and they are not Latinos.
Fair enough. I just wanted...
And that's not just by us, but it's mainly by them. And personally, I'm just fine.
Excellent. I just wanted
with that definition.
Sure. Now, if I understand correctly, you grew up in a family that went to Catholic church. How serious were they about Catholicism?
Well, my grandparents were dead serious about it. I remember doing the rosary with especially one of my grandmothers, like crazy, hoping that my miracles would come true. And I'm talking about probably 6, 7 years old, and just every night and celebrating all the things that the Catholic Church celebrates. And I don't recall what the names are. I don't recall when they happen. I don't know if it's a blockage that I have, it's a mental block that I have, or it's just that I don't care. But I don't remember dates, but I do remember praying with her. I did my first communion, I did my confirmation, I went to Catholic school, but I was always the outsider in all that. And all the my first communion and confirmation, there is always a party associated to that. So that was my goal, the party, not the spirit,
Sure.
not the body. So it was just, I knew it came with a party, came with gifts, it came with a good time. Same thing for my marriage. When I got married through church. Not because, I don't know how they define in religious terms, but, I just wanted a party, I wanted a dress. And when I got married, you had to be married in the church to be able to wear a white dress or cream dress or some sort of flowy dress, because if you did it outside the church, you kind of had to do it in regular clothes. So that was the reason for me to marry in church.
Sure. Now, I assume at this point in time, you're not Catholic?
Absolutely not. I was never a Catholic. That was just a label that was given to me because, labels, especially religious labels, I think are given to people generally speaking, according to the area where they are born. And because I was born in Latin America, and in those times, the majority of the people were Catholic, that label got stuck, was attached to me. But, had I been in the Middle East, I'd probably be Muslim, or, in Asia, I would have been, something else. So, no, I'm not Catholic, to make a long story short.
Sure. And in your chapter, you also talked about, and you just mentioned, the vast majority of Latinos are probably Catholic. Is that still true, or is that changing some?
I think that is changing. Even when I was doing some research for my essay, I noticed that Mormons have reached a very high number in Latin America. And I think that's because Catholics are very bad Catholics in general. So they are kind of what I call religious hoppers. They go from being Muslim to being Catholic, to being Muslim, to being Jewish, to being this, to being that, as long as they have what I call the imaginary friend always very close to them. But it doesn't matter where that imaginary friend comes from, as long as they have one. Because I don't understand, if you give it a minute of thought, why you wouldn't consider changing your mind from having an imaginary friend to even giving consideration to not having one at all. Because I think that kind of implies a little bit deeper thinking than saying, well, I don't like Catholics. I like, Baptists better. To me, I don't understand that. But I think it has a lot to do with personality.
Yes, indeed. I know when I was growing up, I don't think I ever really got it. I never really accepted it. And at 13, I officially declared myself an atheist. But I am still fascinated by it today, why people believe it, because it seems so obvious to me to not be true. And one of the main points of your chapter is that Hispanic women should leave religion. Why do you think that is?
Because I think, to put it in kind of blunt words, and it's a self-imposed jail. It's kind of like having bars all around you, and you are limited to whatever is inside those bars. But even though you see that there is something else outside the bars, you don't dare to do it because it has been embedded in your brain so badly and for so many years, and it's tied into family, it's tied into birthrights, and it's tied into so many things that are generally very strong ideas in the Hispanic community, that there is a tendency to accept the status quo and never even wonder. I mean, there are many ways there's one for sure way to break the poverty cycle, and I think that's education. But when you try to educate yourself and your family, because you are the girl, you are supposed to have dinner ready for your father, you are supposed to take care of your brother, you are supposed to be like the wife in waiting. That's the way I see it sometimes, that some girls never elevate their thinking to, gosh, maybe I can do something else, or why shouldn't I try to see if I like something else? I always say, if you want to be a housewife and if you want to have 19 kids and you have the power to support them financially and emotionally, go right ahead. Not that I agree with overpopulation, but let's just say in that aspect, go right ahead, because I'm not taking care of your kids. But all I'm asking is, like, why don't you think about it? Why don't you think outside the box and see what potential benefits might come your way if you decide to step outside those typical roles that have been embedded in your brain since you were born a little girl. So I think that's why it's so important that women, Latino women, take a step outside and think, is this the only option that I have, or is there anything else that I can do that will fulfill me as much as having kids? So sure. I think that's where the problem, the main obstacle lies for Latinas.
And you think a large part of that comes from Catholicism, the Catholic Church, that women are supposed to be mothers, they're supposed to have babies, and the man is supposed to be macho and protect the women, and the women are supposed to feed the men kind of thing? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's pretty much, because I even see it in my own family. I have one brother, and my mother is 80-something years old, and she's still worried whether he ate the right food, whether he ate at the right time. She doesn't worry nearly as much as us about us as he does him. And he's a grown man. He's not a kid, number one. Number two, I don't understand why she does it. We've had this conversation over and over again. She doesn't like it, and I don't push it because she's elderly. But I never understood, well, if he needs to eat, and if she's so concerned about him, how come she's not concerned about us? So we are supposed to kind of, provide for ourselves, whereas he can just have the expectation that she or one of my sisters is going to provide. I exclude myself because I'm not good at doing that. But, it's always caught my attention, and I always observe that. And I observe it within the rest of the family. There is a clear, absolute preference for boys in the family as opposed to girls. The girls are the most accomplished in all our family, not just my sisters, but outside, my cousins. Women are the most accomplished, but guys get all the glory, no matter how stupid they are.
Yeah, I can tell you that that's not just in the Latino community. That does happen. I've seen it in families, in my family, where the men just kind of get to sit around and the women spend all day in the kitchen making food for them to eat because they're in charge, kind of thing.
Yeah, let me tell you, I'm not in charge of the kitchen. I will never be in charge of the kitchen. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, to me, when I speak to some Latina groups, I have been asked not to come back many times, because one of the things that I strongly promote is equal rights or equal responsibilities or equality in general for boys and girls. So one of the questions that I always ask, if your son stays out all night long, what are the consequences? Oh, well, nothing, because he's with the girlfriend. So what about if your daughter stays out all night? Oh, well, no, the virginity, the purity, she can't be a whore. I'm going like, why? Why? And then you come back and complain that machismo is something that exists in the Latino community. Who do you think creates that? Women do. Yeah. So to me, it's a very handicapping thing that we have when it comes to the different roles and the predetermined roles and the gender responsibilities that are assigned in the Latino community. Because before, just a quick example, the girls in this country were playing soccer way before the first soccer team came out in Latin America, and they are still not very common because that's not something that girls do.
Right.
So it's kind of to me that's one of the biggest issues that Latinas have. This predetermination roles, these responsibilities that are given or that are kind of imposed on you by the time you are born, just because you were born a girl.
Now, does your family know that you're not religious? Would you call yourself an atheist?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. See, this is the thing. even though I went to Catholic school, I had some issues while going to Catholic school. I was expelled a couple of times because I would run away from religious classes, So I didn't call myself an atheist, while I was going to high school or elementary or junior high. But, the more I think about it, I was born this way. It's just that I didn't call it atheist. And they didn't call me atheist. They call me contrarian, or they call me rebellious. But I think it's always been me. And it's been me officially, openly. And I've told this story before, but, when I was going to the praying stage with my, or phase with my grandmother, and then I would go to my other grandparents' home in another city, and that city has a lot of churches, and it had a church close to their house. I remember going to the church and going all over the church, opening doors and hoping to see God, because I wanted to believe so bad. I wanted to believe all this stuff that I was praying to during these rosary, brainwashing sessions, and I just wanted to see the person that I was praying or that I was talking about, and it never happened. So I think at that point, and because I have such vivid recollection of that, I think that was my turning point where I said, this is a lie. Yeah. And at that point, I just played the game, but I was never a believer.
And your family's pretty much okay with it, or have you had any trouble because of it?
They don't discuss it. They don't engage me in any conversation, and they don't refute it. They don't. They're kind of like deaf to it. But it's not. It's not a point. They will not engage me in any type of conversation, because I will go and I will talk about the imaginary friend. I will talk the fable book, and they don't like me to say those terms. But they never said, "Oh, you can't do that. We all believe in this in the family." No, but it's not a conversation that I have with them. They know who I am. I call it what it is. They listen. They make no comments, and they pretend that I said nothing.
I like it. Now, one of the things that you had, while a large portion of the Latino community is Catholic, you did point out in your chapter that you're not aware of anyone being excommunicated or kicked out of their family. So that's a hopeful sign. Can you tell us more about that?
This is more kind of anecdotal, and I read it in a few places as well. But, they always say, well, many times Latinas say, well, I'm not a believer, but I don't want my family to know because, they're not going to talk to me anymore. And I think that is more of a psychological excuse rather than a reality, because the same thing applies to gays. A lot of Latino families at one point were pretty much against gays. But you know what? They accept gays now much more than they accept atheists. And even though they might not talk to you for a week, for a month, maybe a year, let's say, the family tie kicks in, and they kind of say, well, we're just going to learn to disagree as long as you don't talk to us about this, but we're going to go back and love you just the way we loved you before we knew that you were an atheist. So I really don't think that anybody is going to be kicked out of their family forever, or is going to be kicked out of any group forever. They might perceive you in a different way, and in kind of a weird way. Like, for example, I'm still in contact with a lot of classmates from my Catholic school years, and oh my gosh, the blessing goes back and forth, and God this, and thank you, today's Monday, guys looking after you, and I'm thinking, why do I have to listen to all this in the group? So, sometimes they go like, I'm sorry, Hypatia, for saying that. I know that you don't believe in this, but they don't get into arguments with me about it. They just keep talking about their subject, and they know that I'm not, that I don't think like they do. They don't reject me. They don't accept me. like I've heard in some families that, once they learn that you're an atheist, they will never talk to you again. They will kind of, forget that you ever lived on this earth. I don't think that happens a lot in the Latino community. It might be a temporary thing, but I've never seen something, a daughter or son that will be excommunicated from everywhere just because he or she came out and said that they were atheists.
Excellent. So I think the end result here is that family is very important, and they may not like it, but you're still family, and they're going to allow you to stay and talk to you. And that's good. It's reassuring. Maybe some listeners are Hispanic or Latino, whatever term they want to use for themselves, and they're reassured by this, and maybe they can come out and tell their family. And, you don't have to make a big deal. Just be like Hypatia and speak your mind. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think, and there are many ways, generally speaking, I don't go to anybody that I'm meeting for the first time and say, hi, my name is Hypatia. I'm a heterosexual woman, a heterosexual atheist woman. No, I show them what I am. I let them know, I let them learn about me. And then in a conversation, they say, by the way, I don't believe in that, because by me showing you that I don't drink blood from little kids, that I'm not immoral, that I'm not unethical, and that is shown with actions. And later on is, you come 360, say, oh, by the way, I'm a good person, moral, and I don't have a religion. I don't have an imaginary friend. I don't need a fable book to rule my life. You met me, you know what I'm all about. So, this is what an atheist looks like. But that comes after the fact, because I don't think, like I said, I never go to people and say, I'm an atheist and you have to accept me and you have to. No, to me, atheism is part of me. It's not what defines me. I have many interests in life, but my interests are ruled and guided by evidence and by fact, not by, praying and doing any of that. And sometimes it's very difficult for me to hold my tongue and say, why you have a sick child? Why are you asking for praise instead of taking that child to the doctor? But sometimes, you just have to kind of take a look, stay on the sidelines and see how the things evolve, because imposing, I'm not a good at evangelizing. That's not my thing. I really hope that people will come to their own understanding. And I do feel very sorry if you never do come to your own ideas or your own conclusion. I feel sorry for you, kind of is a way to say, well, I feel that you're kind of stupid, but okay, that's internal. I don't go out telling people, oh, well, you are not a non-believer like me, therefore you are stupid. But I'm thinking, well, if this person cannot follow a way of a thought process and conclude that it's better not to have a religion, or how they would benefit from not having a religion, or how would they benefit from having stronger family ties rather than putting their hopes and all their dreams on faith, it's difficult for me to understand. But I don't try to convince them otherwise, because I don't believe in evangelizing. Evangelizing for me doesn't work. I mean, I was laughed by the nuns that I went to school. They were never able to brainwash me.
Right.
So it has to be, we have to take accountability. I cannot blame everyone because of my fault. They might be contributors to my hiccups and handicaps, but they're not solely responsible. I have to assume some responsibility. So it is up to me as a Latina. Am I better off today that I'm openly atheist and living my life as my true self, as if I had continued my path as a Catholic girl? And the answer to me is absolutely yes, because what you see is what you get. I don't have any hidden agendas, and I'm not trying to proselytize or evangelize or do anything. you do. Now, I'm not going to say that it doesn't bother me. I try. To me, it's very difficult to have a civilized conversation with somebody that is going to be shoving some sort of religion or God down my throat. But because I don't have the patience.
Right. I understand that.
I understand. Yeah.
Well, have you written other books or other chapters in other books?
Not yet. I did do the translation for Why We Believe in God for Professor Andy Thompson from UVA. And that is also a very good book. It's a starting book. It's very easy, like if you get into this complicated set of mind where you don't know how to explain certain things, that's a very good book. It's an easy read for you to speak to a younger kid, or even if you want to read and because you're having doubts, that might give you some sense of explanation of why you might be having those doubts. So I translated that book into Spanish, and hopefully, somebody has read it, and I think that the most satisfaction somebody can get is say, well, I read that book, or I heard the podcast, and you said this and that really encouraged me to come out of my shell and explore what would life be if I wasn't so concerned with godly things. I mean, to me, that's the maximum thing, because it means that I kind of incentivated someone to start doing some free thinking. And I think once we acquire that, and especially in the Latino community, because the way we were conquered by the Spaniards and by the Portuguese, and the way they were genius in the sense that rather than bringing weapons and stuff, what they brought was a psychological weapon. So they control the Indians and all the people that they found in the continent that they needed to be controlled. They control them with these ideas of divine right. You are better if you're pure European. Then you are less pure if you're mixed with this or with that or here and there. And, it was repeated over and over and over again until it became kind of part of the DNA. And I think I also mentioned in the book that some countries are, if you check the literacy level in Latin America, the most affected countries that are still suffering from that divine right mentality, it's the countries with the lowest literacy rate. So, and those are the countries that many of their people have migrated to this country, and they continue bringing that on their shoulders, and they continue indoctrinating directly or indirectly their children the same way, which makes it absolutely difficult to change. You have to come in there and you have to try to change things, and that's not an easy thing. So that's why education is so important, especially for women, because Latino women, I think that they are the lowest individuals in any kind of way, shape, or form that you look at when you look at all the minorities in this country. Well, I shouldn't say the lowest, but I think because of pure numbers, they should have been able to accomplish much more than they have accomplished, but because they are trapped in this 17th century mentality, they are still not able to get out of their shells and reach their full potential. And there are many, many women that they have so much to contribute besides being mothers. I'm not saying if that's your call, go ahead and do it, but not all women have that call. And we have to be able to accept it, and we have to be able to stop criticizing other women when they come out and say, I don't want to have any children, or I'm not ready for children right now. That's not what family is all about. Family is about being ready emotionally and financially to have a family. So that's something that as a community, we still have a lot of work to do.
Sure. If someone likes what you're saying or wants to talk to you or talk about their family or invite you to speak at a conference, is there a way they can contact you?
Sure. My email is Hypatia says, so it's HYPATIA says @gmail.com. And I have spoken in a few conferences. I'm a little bit concerned right now with the things that are going. I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want to say something that is going to be perceived in the wrong way and be attacked, as many people are being attacked in the movement right now, which I think is a detriment to the movement.
We'll just keep
an absolute detriment.
Yeah, we'll just keep it that you're willing to show up and talk and lend your voice and not just be talked about, but have you actually there speaking for the people that you represent.
Oh, absolutely. That's something, that's what I look to continue doing. And hopefully that way, that helps some people think outside the box, and they can come out to the conclusion that, it is okay to live without a religion, and that is an option, and there is nothing wrong with it. And your family is still going to love you eventually, even though they might be very unhappy with you for the first few months.
Well, Hypatia, thank you very much for your time. And as you said in your chapter, it's important for me, not to talk about what you're dealing with, but allowing you the opportunity to be involved and have your voice be heard. So I am so honored that you came and spent time with me on the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, thank you so much for having us. And please buy the book. It's on sale in Amazon, and you won't regret it. And you get a view from several different women. So you are bound to find something that you can really identify with. And hopefully many Latinas will at least see the point that I'm trying to make in my essay.
Thank you very much.
Hey you, it's me, Sarah Silverman. Lately I've noticed a lot of really sad, really long commercials on TV with grossly sick, emaciated people from all over the world. And it turns out they look that way because they don't have food. And I know what you're thinking. If you don't like it, Silverman, TiVo passed it. I did. You still see them. Especially because, I have a 48-inch plasma high-def TV. So every devastating image is in, brilliant, crisp, vivid, like they're in my apartment, So how do I get these people out of my apartment, basically? And I think I figured it out. All I have to do is end world hunger. And then I'm like, okay, how are you going to end world hunger? And then it hit me. Sell the Vatican, feed the world. Think about it. We need a hero, and who is more primed to be our hero than the Pope? He's literally a caped crusader. What is the Vatican worth, $500 billion? This is great. Sell the Vatican, take a big chunk of that money, build a gorgeous condominium for you and all of your friends to live in, all the amenities, swimming pool, tennis court, water slide. And with the money left over, feed the whole fucking world. You preach to live humbly, and I totally agree. So now maybe it's time for you to move out of your house that is a city. On an ego level alone, you will be the biggest hero in the history of ever. And by the way, any involvement in the Holocaust, bygones. I know some of you out there are like, well, why don't those bums get a job like the rest of us? Well, did you know that the average Arby's employee in Ethiopia only gets paid nothing an hour because they don't have one. They don't have one. The bottom line is this. If you sell the Vatican and you take that money and you use it to feed every single human being on the planet, you will get crazy pussy. All the pussy. And I don't mean literally. That might not be your cup of tea. I don't know what your version of all the pussy is. But you'll get all the pussy. Amen.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Going to wrap up the show with a couple of reviews. First in iTunes, and I'm not sure where I left off because of the whole being away for a while. So hopefully the couple of the older ones here aren't repeats, but I'm going to do them real quick. From Eric P. in May, great podcast. You don't have to enjoy both finance and straightforward, rational viewpoints to love the show. But since I'm an accountant by trade and spent half of my century under the spell of organized religion, this show is both refreshing and informative. For me, Phil is down to earth and rational as you can get. Thank you, Eric P. Another one from Coderhead. Phil does a fantastic job of laying out devices and reasonable strategy. Reason strategy. Oh my God, I can't read. Let me try again. Phil does a fantastic job of laying out devices and reasoned strategy for financial planning. It's amazing you can get this show for free. Yes, it's all free. But clearly Phil is sharing this with his listeners because he cares. I do care. Guests are great. Skepticism and humanism are on point. Overall, the show is worth your time. Thank you, Coderhead. Athena M. Martinez. I love the show. Phil is really easy to listen to and very helpful to me when I emailed him with a couple of questions. So thank you, Athena, and hopefully I was helpful. And if you're listening to the show and you want to ask a question, maybe even set up a time to meet, which is getting harder and harder for me to do. But my email is phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Another one here on iTunes, Nolan0102. I have already suggested the show to some of my more open-minded friends who don't seem to understand how to money. The combination of investing skeptically and applying the same skeptical thinking process to all other aspects of life really, it says hot home, but probably hit home with me, and I think it would definitely help a lot of people who are really close to me as well. Thanks for the great content. One last one, really short, on Stitcher. Thank you for putting a comment on Stitcher. And of course, if you like the show, you can go give me a review. I do not have a Patreon page. I'm not asking for your donations. Sometimes I ask for other groups, and I'll have a new one coming up. I hope to announce in one or two shows, and I think you're going to really like it, but you just got to wait for it. On Stitcher from Aviator 0023, one of my favorite podcasts. See, quick, easy, to the point. Give me a 5-star review. It makes me feel like my life has meaning. No, really, I'm fine without it, but it's just kind of nice to see and nice to kind of read comments. I will also be at CSI-Con in Las Vegas. And then I think just 2 weeks later, FFRF, Freedom from Religion Foundation in San Francisco. So if you're going to one or either of those events, please feel free to find me and say hello. I look forward to seeing you somewhere out there on the road. Until then, ciao.